A young man scrolls through social media. He sees a quote attributed to a dictator. Something about discipline, about strength, about order. The quote has millions of likes, thousands of retweets, hundreds of thousands of shares. The comments are full of people saying things like, "He had the right idea. If only our leaders were this strong." This is what real leadership looks like. The dictator in question, he murdered hundreds of thousands, tortured dissidents, eliminated opposition. But nobody mentions that. They just admire the quote. This is the stupid trend we need to talk about. The trend of admiring dictators. It's everywhere. On social media, in comment sections, in casual conversation. People romanticize authoritarianism, admire strongmen, praise dictators, usually from the comfort of their democratic countries, from the safety of their free societies. They admire the order, the efficiency, the strength they imagine dictators possess, but they don't admire the torture, the genocide, the complete elimination of human freedom. Today, we're going to explore 15 reasons why this trend is stupid, 15 reasons why admiring dictators makes no sense. If you're interested in political science, history, why people are drawn to authoritarianism, and how to think critically about dangerous ideologies, subscribe to Surprising. Every week we explore how societies actually work. We examine dangerous trends. We discuss why people believe what they believe. We analyze political movements and their consequences. Subscribe now so you don't miss our next video on politics and history. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And thanks for watching. This is a trend that deserves to be called out. Clearly, directly, without apology. Reason 15. The dictators were also incredibly inefficient, admiring order that doesn't actually exist. People admire dictators because they imagine them as efficient, as strong, as decisive. They imagine dictators getting things done, making hard decisions, cutting through bureaucracy. But here's the reality that shatters this image. Most dictatorships are phenomenally inefficient, chasing inefficiency everywhere, corruption at every level, incompetence masked by propaganda. Stalin's Soviet Union was a catastrophe of inefficiency, a complete disaster. Production quotas were met by lying, blatant, obvious lying. Factories reported producing goods they never actually produced, just to please the leader. The leadership never knew the truth because the truth meant death, meant being sent to the gulags. So everyone lied, at every level. The whole system was built on falsehood. Hitler's Nazi Germany? Competing agencies, different departments working at cross purposes, no clear chain of command, lots of conflict, lots of inefficiency, lots of people working against each other. The appearance of efficiency was propaganda. The reality was chaos and infighting. North Korea is an economic failure, an absolute catastrophe. Millions starving. Despite decades of authoritarian control, North Korea's economy is in shambles. China's Cultural Revolution was a disaster of incompetence. Mao destroyed his own economy, killed millions through famine, all while claiming to be efficient and strong. The efficiency people admire is propaganda, is an image, is a carefully constructed lie. The reality is chaos and incompetence and corruption and failure. Reason 14, dictators always collapse or get worse. There's no stable authoritarianism. People imagine dictatorships as stable, as orderly, as permanent, as enduring. But dictatorships are inherently unstable. They collapse, they get worse, they evolve into nightmares. This is a consistent pattern throughout history. Hitler didn't just stay put and maintain his initial level of authoritarianism. He escalated, got worse, went from authoritarian to genocidal, from murdering political opponents to murdering entire ethnic groups. Stalin didn't just stay put and maintain his initial grip on power. He escalated, got worse, started purges, started killing his own people, purged his own party, killed his own generals, created terror and paranoia. Mao didn't just stay put and maintain his initial vision. He escalated, got worse, launched the Cultural Revolution, encouraged the young to attack intellectuals, killed millions, destroyed cultural heritage. Pol Pot didn't just maintain a stable system. He escalated into genocide. The pattern is absolutely consistent. Authoritarians escalate. become more brutal, more extreme, because there's no mechanism to constrain them, no checks and balances, no legal limits, no one to say no, no one to stop them, no one to hold them accountable. The power keeps growing, the violence keeps escalating, the cruelty keeps expanding, until eventually the system collapses from the weight of its own brutality, from its own unsustainability. Reason 13. You're admiring them from safety. Easy to admire when you're not the victim. Here's the brutal truth about admiring dictators from a democracy. You can admire them because you don't live under them. You have freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of thought. You can express whatever views you want without fear of arrest. You can say whatever you want about the dictator. The worst you get is a critical response, a debate. Try saying the same thing in his country and you disappear, vanish. Your family never finds your body. You're never heard from again. It's easy to admire authoritarianism when you're enjoying democracy. It's easy to admire strength when you're not the one being crushed by it, when you're not the one living in fear, when you're not the one suppressed. The people actually living under dictators, they hate it. They flee. They resist. They risk their lives to escape, send their children on dangerous journeys to get away. But the comfortable person in a free country, they romanticize it from the safety of their sofa. They admire it from behind a screen in a democracy they take for granted. That's not admiration. That's ignorance. That's privilege. That's obscene. Reason 12. Dictators are often brutal toward their own people. The strength is actually just violence. The strength people admire in dictators is almost always just violence. Just brute force. Just the ability and willingness to hurt people. Violence against protesters. Violence against dissidents. Violence against the population. When people praise the dictator's strong leadership, what they're really admiring is his willingness to brutalize his own citizens, to disappear them, to torture them, to execute them, to crush them. That's not strength. That's brutality. That's the opposite of actual strength. Actual strength would be inspiring people to follow, building consensus, creating systems that work. A strong leader inspires people to follow willingly, builds something that endures. A dictator forces people to obey through fear, through violence, through terror. The distinction is crucial, and it matters profoundly for understanding politics. Reason 11. The admiration is based on propaganda. You're believing the lies the dictator tells. Here's what actually happens in a dictatorship. A dictator controls all media, all information, all newspapers, all television, all radio, all internet. He creates a narrative about himself, spreads propaganda, tells lies, rewrites history. Then people from democracies consume this propaganda and believe it. They see the carefully curated images, read the sanitized quotes, hear the official narrative, and they believe it. They admire it. They repeat it. They admire the carefully constructed image, not the reality, never the reality. North Korea's propaganda says, Kim Jong-un is a genius, a god, infallible, says he doesn't need to urinate or defecate, says he invented the hamburger, says he scored 18 holes in one the first time he played golf. It's absurd propaganda. Yet people in the West sometimes share these images, caption them with admiration, treat them seriously, but they're admiring a lie, admiring propaganda, admiring the image the dictator created, not reality, not truth. Never truth. Reason 10. Democracies actually solve problems better. You're admiring a system that fails. People admire dictators because they imagine them as problem solvers, as decisive. But democracies actually solve problems better. Over time, sustainably, reliably. Democracy is messy, slow, frustrating, inefficient by appearance. But it works. It actually produces results. Dictatorships make dramatic declarations, then fail to follow through, or make things worse. Look at technological innovation. Look at where new ideas come from. Almost all of it comes from democracies, free societies, places where people can think and experiment and fail. Silicon Valley, MIT, Cambridge, Stanford, all in democracies. The internet, computers, smartphones, medical advances, scientific breakthroughs, almost all come from democracies. Look at economic growth. Look at where prosperity comes from. Democracies. Free societies, places where people can create and innovate, places where there's rule of law, where property is protected, where contracts are enforced. Dictatorships stagnate, produce nothing new, generate only decline. Look at which countries people try to move to, which countries attract immigration. Democracies. Free countries. People flee dictatorships to reach democracies. The dictator's decisiveness is actually just authoritarianism. And authoritarianism doesn't work. Reason #9. You're romanticizing genocide. The cost is human lives. When you admire a dictator, you're admiring someone who murdered people. Often millions of people. Stalin, 20 million dead, maybe more. Historians still debate the exact number. Hitler, 6 million in the Holocaust, millions more in war, 9 to 11 million total. Mao, 45 million to 80 million dead. The Great Leap Forward alone killed millions through famine. Pol Pot, 2 million dead. In a country of 7 million, nearly a third of the population. When you share a quote from these people and admire their strength, you're romanticizing genocide. You're making light of murder on an incomprehensible scale. You're admiring people who committed the worst crimes in human history. You're treating their words as wisdom when they're actually the words of monsters. That's not okay. That's morally reprehensible. That's obscene. Reason 8. Dictatorships create refugee crises. People literally flee for their lives. When dictators create order, they do it by forcing people to flee. Cuba, hundreds of thousands fled on makeshift rafts, risked drowning, risked death. Syria, millions fled Assad's regime, the largest refugee crisis of the century. North Korea, thousands risk their lives crossing into China, risk starvation, risk execution if caught. Venezuela, millions fled Maduro's dictatorship. Entire families left everything behind. Myanmar, Rohingya fled genocide. Hundreds of thousands displaced. When people are willing to risk death to escape a system, that system is profoundly broken. If the dictator's rule was actually good, people wouldn't flee. But they do, millions of them. Because the reality is so much worse than any Western admirer imagines. Reason 7. The economy collapses. Strong leadership that destroys prosperity. The strong dictator admired by social media scrollers often presides over economic catastrophe. Venezuela had the highest oil reserves in the world. Should have been wealthy. Now people are starving. Children are malnourished. Hospitals have no medicine. North Korea, famine, widespread malnutrition, economic collapse. Among the poorest countries on earth. Cuba, decades of economic failure, isolation, poverty, crumbling infrastructure. Zimbabwe, hyperinflation, economic destruction. Currency became worthless. The dictator's decisiveness creates economic policy that destroys the economy. But the admirer on social media doesn't see the breadlines, doesn't see the starving children, doesn't see the people eating tree bark to survive. He just admires the strength from thousands of miles away. Reason 6. Dissidents get tortured and killed. The strength is built on corpses. When you admire a dictator's strength, you're admiring a system built on torture. Torture chambers, secret police, disappearances, mass executions. The famous line about Mussolini, he made the trains run on time. But the trains run because anyone who complains gets arrested. The order is maintained through fear, through violence, through torture, through secret police who can knock on your door at midnight, through prisons where people are tortured until they confess to crimes they didn't commit, through executions carried out without trial. That's not admirable. That's evil. That's the worst of what humans can do to each other. Reason 5. Democracies have been better for human welfare. The evidence is overwhelming. Over the past 100 years, democracy has correlated strongly with higher life expectancy, better healthcare, better education, less poverty, more freedom, better outcomes on virtually every measure of human well-being. Dictatorships have correlated with lower life expectancy, worse healthcare, worse education, more poverty, more suffering, more violence. This isn't opinion. This is measurable fact. This is data. People live better lives in democracies. They're healthier, wealthier, more educated. They live longer, have better healthcare, have better opportunities for their children. Yet people admire dictators. Despite overwhelming evidence that dictatorship is worse for human welfare, despite centuries of data showing that freedom is better than tyranny. Reason 4. You're admiring people who would kill you. The dictator despises you. Here's something lost on admirers. The dictator wouldn't want you around. If you lived in his country and expressed the views you express in democracies, you'd be arrested, tortured, killed. Your family would suffer reprisals. The dictator doesn't admire your admiration. He despises people who admire him from afar. He views them as soft, weak, decadent, Western. Corrupted, he views democracy itself as weakness, views free speech as degeneracy. You're admiring someone who would murder you if you lived in his country. You're admiring someone who would torture your family, who would make you disappear. That's profoundly stupid. That's profoundly ignorant. Reason 3. It's an escape from responsibility. Admiring dictatorship because democracy is hard. Here's the psychological truth. People admire dictators because democracy is hard. Democracy requires participation, engagement, thinking, working together, compromise. You have to vote, have to stay informed, have to engage with people who disagree, have to work through messy, complicated processes, have to accept partial victories. Dictatorship is simple. Just follow orders. Don't think. Don't question. Don't engage. Someone else makes the decisions. Someone else takes responsibility. People are drawn to dictatorship because it promises to remove responsibility from them, promises an escape from the hard work of freedom. But that's exactly why dictatorship is evil. It requires people to surrender their humanity, to become sheep, to stop thinking, to stop being people, to become servants, subjects, tools, objects. Reason 2. You're contributing to a dangerous normalization. Admiration leads to acceptance. When you admire dictators on social media, you're normalizing dictatorship. You're making it seem acceptable, reasonable, desirable, normal. You're influencing others, pulling them toward authoritarianism, shifting the Overton window. This isn't harmless. This is dangerous. This has real consequences. Throughout history, the path to dictatorship starts with admiration. Starts with people saying, he's strong, he'll fix things, he's what we need. Starts with normalizing authoritarian ideas. Starts with romanticizing authoritarians. Starts with social media posts praising dictators. Then the dictatorship arrives, and by then it's too late. By then the population has been primed, has been normalized, has accepted the idea. Your admiration for the dictator is contributing to that process. Your posts, your shares, your comments, they matter, they influence, they pull people in a direction. Reason 1. It's morally reprehensible to admire people who committed crimes against humanity. This needs to be said clearly. Let me be absolutely clear. Admiring dictators is morally wrong. These are people who committed crimes against humanity. A genocide, murder on incomprehensible scales. To admire them is to admire evil, to celebrate evil, to normalize evil. It doesn't matter if you're just admiring their quotes or just admiring their leadership style. It doesn't matter if you're ironically admiring them or just appreciating their efficiency. You're admiring evil people, evil systems, evil ideologies. There's no nuance here, no complexity, no valid counterargument. Dictatorship is evil. Dictators are evil. Admiring them is evil. Defending them is evil. Excusing them is evil. There is no middle ground. There is no respectful disagreement on this point.